He never satisfying expected that a simple errand would change his entire life. Marcus Townsend stood in the doorway of his small apartment, holding a cardboard box filled with his boss's personal files, and wondering how everything had led to this single moment. But to understand what happened that evening, you need to understand the man Marcus was before he ever knocked on that door. You need to know the weight he carried on his shoulders every single day, and you need to understand just how far apart two people can stand while working only 10 feet from each other. Marcus was 38 years old. He had rough hands, tired eyes, and a heart that had been broken so many times it had learned to beat quietly. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building where the elevator worked only half the time. The carpet in the hallway smelled like old cleaning solution. The walls were thin enough that he could hear his neighbor's television every night. But none of that mattered to Marcus. What mattered was the small bedroom at the end of the hall, where his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, slept beneath a lavender blanket covered in tiny silver stars. Lily was everything. She was the reason Marcus woke up at 5:30 every morning. She was the reason he ironed his shirt even when his back ached. She was the reason he packed 2 lunches every night before bed. One for her, one for himself, both made with the same careful hands. Her mother had left when Lily was barely 2 years old. Just packed a suitcase one Tuesday afternoon, kissed the child on the forehead, and walked out through the front door like she was going to the grocery store. She never came back. Marcus never got a full explanation. He got a text message 3 weeks later that said simply, "I'm sorry, I can't do this." And that was the end of that chapter. For 5 years Marcus raised Lily alone. He learned how to braid hair by watching videos on his phone late at night. He learned how to make pancakes shaped like butterflies, because Lily said regular circles were boring. He sat through school plays, parent-teacher conferences, and Saturday morning soccer games where Lily spent more time picking dandelions than chasing the ball. He did all of it alone. And he never once complained. Not because he didn't feel the exhaustion deep in his bones, but because Lily looked at him like he was the whole world. And when your child looks at you like that, you find a way to keep standing. Marcus worked as an operations coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company called Whitmore Distribution. It was not a glamorous job. He managed schedules, tracked shipments, organized driver routes, and handled the dozens of small fires that erupted every single day in a warehouse operation. He was good at his job. Quiet, reliable, efficient. The kind of worker who never asked for praise and never received it either. He showed up early. He stayed late when needed. He kept his head down and his work clean. The pay was decent enough to keep the apartment, cover Lily's school expenses, and put food on the table every night. There was never anything left over for extras. No vacations, no new clothes unless something wore out completely. No dinners at restaurants. But there was always enough. Marcus made sure of that. His boss was a woman named Catherine Ellsworth. She was 41 years old, sharp as a blade, and carried herself with the kind of authority that made rooms go quiet when she walked in. Catherine had climbed the corporate ladder with precision and discipline. She held a master's degree in business administration. She wore tailored blazers in dark colors. Her hair was always pulled back in a sleek arrangement that never had a single strand out of place. Her office sat at the far end of the warehouse floor, behind a glass wall that let her observe everything without being part of it. She was respected, she was feared. And she was, without question, the most emotionally distant person Marcus had ever worked for. Catherine did not do small talk. She did not ask about weekends or birthdays or children. She communicated through emails even when Marcus sat only 30 feet away. Her instructions were clear, direct, and stripped of anything resembling warmth. Marcus, the Henderson file needs to be reconciled by 3. Marcus, there's a discrepancy in the Route 7 manifest. Fix it. Marcus, I need the quarterly projections on my desk before you leave today. Always his name first, then the task. Never a please. Never a thank you. Not out of cruelty, Marcus thought, but out of habit. Catherine had built a wall around herself so high and so thick that even basic courtesy had to climb over it to get through. And yet Marcus never resented her. He understood walls. He had built a few of his own. He recognized something behind those sharp green eyes of hers, something he could never quite name but always felt. It was a kind of loneliness that hid itself behind competence. A sadness that wore a pressed blazer and carried a leather briefcase. He never mentioned it. He never stared too long. He simply did his work, nodded when she gave instructions, and kept the respectful distance that the professional world demanded. Their dynamic was a carefully maintained silence. Two people who occupied the same space for 40 hours a week and somehow managed to reveal almost nothing to each other. Marcus would enter her office to deliver reports. And Catherine would take them without looking up. He would stand there for a moment, waiting to see if she had further instructions, and she would say, "That's all." Without lifting her eyes from the screen, he would leave. The door would close, and the distance between them would remain perfectly, painfully intact. There were small moments though. Tiny fractures in the glass. One afternoon, Marcus had been on the phone with Lily's school. She had fallen on the playground and scraped her knee. It was nothing serious. But his voice had carried that unmistakable tone of parental worry, soft, urgent, tender. When he hung up, he looked over and caught Catherine watching him from behind the glass wall of her office. Their eyes met for just a second. She looked away first. But in that second, Marcus saw something flicker across her face. Recognition maybe. Or longing. He could not be sure. He went back to his spreadsheet and tried not to think about it. Another time, during a late evening at the office, Marcus was the last one on the floor. Catherine emerged from her office carrying her coat over one arm. She paused near his desk. He looked up. She opened her mouth as if she were about to say something, something real, something unrelated to shipments or schedules. But then she closed it again. She gave a small nod instead. "Good night, Marcus," she said. And there was something in the way she said his name that time. It was softer. Almost careful. Like she was holding it gently in her mouth before letting it go. He said good night in return. She walked to the elevator. And the moment dissolved like sugar in warm water. Marcus thought about these moments more than he wanted to admit. Not because he harbored any romantic notions. He was far too practical for that, and far too aware of the canyon between their positions. She was his boss. She drove a silver Audi. She lived somewhere on the other side of town in a house he had never seen. He drove a 10-year-old sedan with a cracked dashboard and a car seat in the back. Their lives were parallel lines. Running side by side but never meant to touch. He accepted that. He had accepted a lot of things in his life. Acceptance was something Marcus was very, very good at. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It was a Thursday in late October. The air had turned crisp. Leaves had begun to fall from the two maple trees in the parking lot outside the warehouse. Marcus was finishing his shift, straightening the papers on his desk, when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Catherine. Not an email this time. A text. That was unusual. Catherine never texted him directly. The message was brief, but something about it felt different from her usual commands. "Marcus, I left a box of important documents and my personal laptop in the office. I am at home and unable to return tonight. Can you bring them to my residence this evening? Address below." He stared at the message for a long moment. He read it twice. Then a third time. The request was simple enough. She had forgotten important materials. She needed them delivered. It was the kind of task that fell within the gray area of his responsibilities. Not quite in his job description, but not entirely outside it either. What struck him was the word, residence. Not office, not warehouse, her home. Catherine Ellsworth was asking him to come to her home. Marcus glanced at the clock. It was already past 6. He needed to pick Lily up from his neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, who watched her on late work nights. He calculated the time in his head. If he picked up Lily first, then drove across town, he could drop off the box and still make it home for Lily's bedtime. It would be tight, but manageable. He typed back a simple reply. "Of course. I'll bring them by this evening." Her response came quickly. Just 2 words. "Thank you." He stared at those 2 words longer than he should have. Catherine Ellsworth had said thank you. In 5 years, he could count on one hand the number of times that had happened. He gathered the box from her office. It was heavier than expected, thick manila folders, a silver laptop in a leather sleeve, and what appeared to be a personal planner bound in dark burgundy leather. He carried it to his car, placed it carefully in the trunk, and drove to Mrs. Alvarez's apartment to pick up Lily. Lily ran to him the way she always did, arms wide open, face bright with the uncomplicated joy that only children possess. "Daddy, Mrs. Alvarez made empanadas and I ate 3, she announced proudly. Marcus smiled and lifted her onto his hip. 3. That's a new record, sweetheart. He thanked Mrs. Alvarez. buckled Lily into her car seat, and pulled out of the parking lot with the box in his trunk and a strange knot forming in his stomach. The drive across town took nearly 30 minutes. The neighborhoods changed gradually. The apartment buildings gave way to houses with front porches. The cracked sidewalks became smooth, tree-lined streets. Mailboxes stood at the end of long driveways. Porch lights glowed warm and golden in the early darkness of autumn. Marcus watched the houses grow larger, the lawns wider, the cars in the driveways newer and sheenier. He felt the distance between his world and this one like a physical pressure against his chest. Catherine's address led him to a house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It was a 2-story home, painted soft gray with white trim. The front garden was immaculate, trimmed hedges, a stone pathway, and a row of chrysanthemums in deep gold and burgundy. The porch light was on. A single car sat in the driveway. The silver Audi. Marcus pulled his old sedan up to the curb and turned off the engine. He sat there for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel. The house was beautiful. It was also, he noticed, very quiet. No other cars, no sounds of family inside. Just the porch light burning against the dark. "Daddy, where are we?" Lily asked from the back seat, her voice small and curious. "I just need to drop something off for work, baby," Marcus said. "It'll only take a minute. You stay right here, okay? I'll be right back." Lily nodded and hugged her stuffed rabbit closer to her chest. Marcus stepped out of the car. The evening air smelled like fallen leaves and wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. He walked to the trunk, lifted the box, and carried it up the stone pathway to the front door. His shoes, old brown work shoes with scuffed toes, looked out of place on the clean stone steps. He felt it. He felt the gap between this world and his own in every step he took. He was not supposed to be here. This was not his neighborhood, not his tax bracket, not his life. He was the operations coordinator who managed shipping routes. He was the man who packed butterfly-shaped pancakes for his daughter's lunch. He was nobody's idea of someone who belonged on this porch. He shifted the box against his hip and rang the doorbell. He heard it chime inside the house, a soft, melodic tone, nothing like the harsh buzz of his own apartment's doorbell. He waited. 10 seconds, 20. He was about to ring again when he heard footsteps. Soft, hurried footsteps on a hard floor. The lock clicked. The handle turned. And the door swung open. Catherine Ellsworth stood in the doorway. And Marcus felt every thought in his head come to a complete and sudden stop. She was wrapped in a silk robe, pale ivory in color. It was loosely tied at the waist, barely holding itself together. The fabric clung to her damp skin, and her hair, that hair that was always so perfectly controlled, fell loose and wet around her shoulders. She had clearly just stepped out of the shower. Her feet were bare on the tile floor. Her face was free of makeup, her cheeks flushed pink from the hot water. And the robe, that thin, shifting silk robe, left almost nothing to the imagination. It draped open slightly at the collarbone, revealing the smooth, vulnerable line of her neck and the shadow of skin beneath. One side had slipped just enough to suggest the curve of her shoulder. Marcus stopped breathing. His arms tightened around the box. His eyes, for one unguarded moment, took in the full picture of her standing there, not as his boss, not as the woman behind the glass wall, but as a woman. A real, breathing, beautiful woman who looked nothing like the armor-plated executive he saw every day. Catherine's eyes widened. Her lips parted. One hand flew to the front of her robe, pulling it tighter. Color rushed to her cheeks, not from the shower this time, but from genuine surprise. She clearly had not expected him so soon. Or perhaps she had lost track of time. Or perhaps she had simply underestimated how unprepared she would feel standing in front of this man without her blazer, without her title, without anything to hide behind. "Marcus," she said. His name again. But this time it sounded entirely different. It was breathless. Startled. Almost fragile. I'm sorry," Marcus said immediately. His voice came out rougher than he intended. He dropped his gaze to the box in his arms. "I should have called first. I have your things." He held the box forward, a barrier between them, a shield of cardboard and manila folders. Catherine stood frozen for a moment. The porch light caught the water droplets on her collarbone. The silk of her robe shimmered faintly. Then she seemed to collect herself, piece by piece, the way a person gathers scattered papers after a gust of wind. She straightened her spine. She tightened the belt of her robe. She tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. No, please. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I lost track of time. I wasn't expecting you this quickly. I apologize for," She gestured vaguely at herself, at the robe, at the entirety of the situation. Marcus did not move. He stood on that porch with the box in his arms and his eyes fixed firmly on the doorframe, on a point just above her head, on anything that was not her. His jaw was tight. His knuckles were white against the cardboard. Every instinct in his body told him two different things at once. One voice said, "Step inside, she asked you to." Another voice, deeper and older and more cautious, said, "This is your boss, this is not your world, do not cross this line." "I can just leave the box here on the porch," he said carefully. "You don't have to, Marcus." Her voice steadied. She looked at him directly. Those green eyes, usually so guarded, were wide open now, unshielded. He could see something in them that he had never seen before. Not authority, not command. Something much more honest than that. "Please, come inside. It's cold and I owe you a proper thank you for driving all the way out here." He hesitated for 3 full seconds. Then he stepped through the door. The inside of Catherine's home was exactly what he would have imagined and nothing like it at the same time. The floors were dark hardwood, polished to a soft gleam. The furniture was elegant but sparse, a large gray sofa, a glass coffee table. A bookshelf lined with volumes that looked read rather than decorative. The air smelled like lavender and something warm, maybe vanilla, from a candle burning on the kitchen counter. It was beautiful, but it was also unmistakably empty. There were no photographs on the walls, no clutter, no signs of anyone else living here. The house was immaculate in the way that only lonely spaces can be. Everything in its place because there was no one to disturb it. Marcus set the box down on the dining table where Catherine directed him. He kept his hands at his sides after that. He kept his eyes respectful. He kept his breathing steady even though his heart was doing something strange and unfamiliar inside his chest. Catherine disappeared down the hallway for a moment, and returned wearing a longer robe. This one thick terrycloth, belted firmly at the waist. Her armor was going back on, piece by piece. But the damage, if you could call it that, was already done. He had seen her. Really seen her. And she knew it. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked. Her voice had found its professional register again, but it wavered at the edges like a radio signal struggling to hold its frequency. "For the drive home." "I appreciate that, but my daughter's in the car," Marcus said. Catherine blinked. "Your daughter?" "Lily. She's 7. I had to pick her up before coming here." "She's waiting outside." Something shifted in Catherine's expression. The professional mask cracked again, but this time what came through was not embarrassment. It was something warmer. Something that looked remarkably like tenderness. "Marcus, you should have told me. Bring her inside. It's too cold for a child to sit in a car." Marcus studied her face for a moment. He searched for any trace of the commanding boss, the woman who communicated through clipped emails and never said please. He could not find her. The woman standing in front of him in a terrycloth robe with wet hair and bare feet was someone else entirely. Someone real. Someone who looked like she hadn't had a visitor in a very long time. He went to the car and unbuckled Lily, who clutched her stuffed rabbit and looked up at the large house with round, wondering eyes. "Is this a castle, Daddy?" she whispered. Marcus smiled despite everything. "No, sweetheart. It's just a house." He carried Lily inside. Catherine was standing in the kitchen, and when she saw the little girl, something extraordinary happened to her face. It softened completely. Every hard edge, every sharp line of authority, dissolved like frost in morning sunlight. She crouched down. This woman who ran an entire distribution operation, who made grown men nervous in meetings, she crouched down on her kitchen floor and said, "Well, hello there. And who is this?" "I'm Lily," the girl said with the fearless honesty of children. "And this is Mr. Buttons." She held up the rabbit. "Mr. Buttons is very handsome," Catherine said, and she smiled. Not the thin, controlled smile Marcus had occasionally seen in the office. A real smile. One that reached her eyes and changed the entire geography of her face. Marcus watched this exchange from the doorway, and something inside his chest shifted like a key turning in a lock that hadn't been opened in years. Catherine made hot chocolate for Lily and coffee for Marcus. They sat at her kitchen island. The logistics coordinator, the executive, and the 7-year-old with a stuffed rabbit, and for a few minutes, the world outside that kitchen ceased to exist. Lily chattered about school. About her friend Sophia, about how she wanted to be an astronaut or maybe a veterinarian or maybe both. Catherine listened with an attention that Marcus found almost painful to witness. She leaned forward. She asked follow-up questions. She laughed at Lily's jokes, and not the polite, obligatory laugh of an adult humoring a child, but a genuine, surprised laugh that seemed to catch even Catherine off guard. When there was a pause in Lily's monologue, Marcus said quietly, "I should get her home. It's a school night." Catherine nodded. The smile faded slowly, like a sunset reluctant to let go of the sky. She walked them to the door. Lily waved goodbye with Mr. Buttons's paw. Catherine waved back. At the door, Marcus paused. He turned to face her. They stood close enough that he could smell the lavender from her shower, could see the small, almost invisible freckles across the bridge of her nose that makeup always hid. She looked up at him, and for the first time in 5 years, the distance between them was not a canyon. It was a breath. "Thank you for bringing the box," she said softly. "And for letting me meet Lily. She's wonderful, Marcus. You've done something remarkable with her." The words hit him somewhere deep, somewhere below the ribs. No one had ever said that to him before. No one had ever acknowledged the magnitude of what he did every day, the pancakes, the braids, the bedtime stories, the showing up, the never giving up. He had carried that weight in silence for 5 years. And here was this woman, this untouchable woman, standing in her doorway in a bathrobe, telling him that she saw it. That she saw him. "Thank you," he said. His voice was thick. He cleared his throat. "And for what it's worth, Miss Ellsworth, you have a beautiful home." She looked back over her shoulder at the immaculate, empty rooms behind her. And when she turned back to him, her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "It's just a house," she said quietly. "It's just a house, Marcus." He understood then. He understood it perfectly. A beautiful house is not a home. A home needs noise and mess and butterfly pancakes and a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Buttons. A home needs someone who stays. He nodded slowly. Something passed between them in that look, not a promise. Not a declaration. Something gentler than that, an opening. A door that had been locked for a very long time, cracking open just enough to let a sliver of light through. Marcus walked Lily to the car. He buckled her in. He started the engine. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Catherine was still standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the warm light of her empty house, watching them go. She raised one hand. A small wave, almost uncertain, like a woman who had forgotten how to reach out but was trying to remember. Lily fell asleep on the drive home. Her head tilted against the car seat, Mr. Buttons tucked under her chin. Marcus drove through the darkening streets with both hands on the wheel and his mind turning over everything that had just happened. The robe. The surprise. The vulnerability in Catherine's eyes. The way she had crouched down on her kitchen floor to greet his daughter. The way she had said, "It's just a house." The way his own name had sounded in her mouth, different from every other time. Softer, warmer, like it mattered. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know if Monday morning would bring back the glass wall and the clipped emails and the professional distance. He did not know if that door would stay open or if Catherine would seal it shut again, brick by brick, the way she had done for years. He did not know any of that. But he knew one thing. Something had changed tonight. Something real. Something that could not be unfelt or unseen. Two people had stood on either side of a doorway, separated by job titles and salaries and neighborhoods and years of practiced loneliness, and for one unguarded moment they had recognized each other. Not as boss and employee. Not as rich and modest. But as two human beings carrying heavy things alone and wondering, quietly, if it always had to be this way. Marcus carried Lily up the 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again. He tucked her into bed beneath the lavender blanket with the silver stars. He kissed her forehead. He turned off the light. He stood in the doorway of her small room and listened to her breathe. Then he went to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and pressed his hands flat against the surface, feeling the coolness of it against his palms. His phone sat in front of him. After a long moment, it buzzed. A message from Catherine. His heart moved strangely as he opened it. "Thank you again, Marcus, I mean it, for everything tonight. Lily is lucky to have you. Good night." He read the message 3 times. He thought about what to say. 100 responses formed and dissolved in his mind. Finally, he typed back 4 words. "Good night, Catherine. Truly." He used her first name for the first time. It felt like stepping across a threshold. It felt like courage. It felt like the beginning of something that neither of them had planned but both of them, perhaps, had been quietly waiting for. Outside, the October wind rattled the thin windows of his apartment. Somewhere across town, in a beautiful, empty house, a woman with wet hair and bare feet read those 4 words on her phone and pressed it against her heart. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Catherine Ellsworth did not feel quite so alone. And that is how it began. Not with grand gestures or dramatic confessions. Not with anything the world would notice. It began with a box of files, a doorbell, and 2 people brave enough to be seen. It began the way the best things always do, unexpectedly, imperfectly, and exactly when they both needed it most. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe that fate still finds a way. And if you want to hear more stories about courage, belonging, and the transformations that happen when we let people in, stay close. The best chapters are never the ones we plan,